In the 1970s, the world screamed for the Bay City Rollers, Britain's biggest ever boy band whose faces sold out arenas, chart-topping singles, and every kind of merchandise imaginable. But behind the glitter of Rollermania, their bank accounts were empty, manipulated by a manager who built an empire from their stolen millions. How did pop's golden boys conquer the globe, yet lose almost everything? The answer begins with the frenzy, and leads to secrets even fame couldn't hide. In 1975, no pop act in Britain, or much of the world, could touch the Bay City Rollers. Their single, Bye Bye Baby, didn't just reach number 1, it became the UK's best-selling single of the entire year, holding the top spot for 6 weeks and outselling even established legends. That summer, Give a Little Love also shot straight to number 1, cementing their grip on the charts. In all, the Rollers racked up 10 UK top 10 singles and 12 top 40 hits, dominating radio waves and record shops alike. Their albums followed the same path. Rollin' and Once Upon a Star both hit number 1, with Rollin' spending an astonishing 58 weeks on the charts. Across 1974 to 1976, their music was everywhere, at parties, in bedrooms, blaring from car stereos. But the numbers went beyond sales. Roller Mania meant sellout tours across the UK, North America, and beyond. Wembley Arena in London filled to its 12,500 capacity for every show. In New York, Madison Square Garden's 18,000 seats vanished in hours. Toronto's Maple Leaf Gardens and Sydney's Showgrounds saw crowds of 16,000 and 30,000, with fans camping overnight for tickets. Global sales estimates soared past 120 million records. At their peak, the Bay City Rollers stood shoulder to shoulder with the biggest acts of their generation, ABBA, the Osmonds, even the Beatles, fueling a frenzy that stretched from Glasgow to Tokyo. The scale of their triumph promised riches beyond imagination, setting expectations that would soon collide with a much darker reality. Plaid scarves, tartan trousers, and roller emblazoned badges flooded high streets from Glasgow to Tokyo. The Bay City Rollers weren't just a band, they were a brand, stamped across everything from bubblegum cards to lunchboxes and even their own line of shoes. By 1975, more than 100 officially licensed products lined store shelves, each one snapped up by fans eager to show their colors. School corridors buzzed with talk of the latest Rollers magazine pullout or the next issue of the official fan club newsletter, which boasted over 80,000 members at its height. Television only supercharged the craze. The Rollers landed their own Saturday morning TV show, drawing millions of viewers and spinning off Christmas specials watched by entire families. Appearances on Top of the Pops and American Bandstand turned every new single into a national event. Their faces stared out from the covers of Jackie, Tiger Beat, and every teen magazine in sight. The band's clean-cut boy next door image was carefully crafted to appeal to parents as much as teenagers. Stories circulated of the boys drinking milk backstage, a wholesome myth that only fueled their appeal. Across Britain, shops sold out of tartan fabric as fans stitched their own Rollers outfits, hoping to catch a glimpse of their idols at a concert or on TV. Merchandise sales soared into the millions, making the Bay City Rollers a household name, even for those who never owned a record. The fever pitch of Rollermania reached far beyond music, embedding the band in the fabric of 1970s youth culture. Tam Paton's grip on the Bay City Rollers extended far beyond booking tours and studio time. From the moment he took charge, Paton set strict rules for the group's daily lives, dictating everything from their diets to their public behavior. Behind closed doors, his methods were far more invasive. Band members described a world where Paton controlled access to money, food, and even sleep, often doling out stimulants to keep them awake through grueling tour schedules. Les McCune later recalled being handed amphetamines before shows, a practice that left the boys wired and exhausted, but always stage ready. Paton's management style thrived on isolation. He discouraged outside friendships, warning the boys that outsiders only wanted to use them. Family visits were monitored or limited, and any hint of rebellion was met with threats, sometimes to replace them, sometimes with more personal consequences. The band's wholesome image was carefully manufactured. Stories of milk drinking and early bedtimes circulated in the press, while Paton quietly introduced drugs behind the scenes. The contrast between their public persona and private reality grew sharper as their fame intensified. Dependency became a tool. Pay was sporadic, often just enough for necessities, with Paton insisting that he was safeguarding their fortunes for the future. He handled all contracts and correspondence, leaving the rollers in the dark about their own finances. Any questions about earnings or royalties were brushed aside, dismissed as ungrateful or naive. The band's lives were scheduled down to the minute: interviews, rehearsals, photo shoots, and endless travel, with Paton as the sole gatekeeper. By keeping the boys exhausted, isolated, and dependent, Tam Paton maintained an unbreakable hold over every aspect of their careers. The carefully curated image of innocence and fun masked a reality shaped by manipulation, secrecy, and control. Underneath the screaming fans in the tartan uniforms, the Bay City Rollers were trapped in a world built entirely to serve their managers' interests. The Bay City Rollers' climb to superstardom was built on contracts that locked them out of the riches their success should have secured. In 1971, the band signed their first major recording deal with Bell Records. The paperwork, managed entirely by Tam Paton, set royalty rates that were shockingly low by industry standards, often just a fraction of what the band's music was earning worldwide. Standard deals for young acts at the time rarely exceeded 4% of retail sales, and the Rollers' agreement was no exception. But even that small share came with strings attached: deductions for packaging, promotion, and advances, all recouped before the band saw a penny. Money from record sales, tours, and merchandise didn't flow directly to the band. Instead, it passed through a maze of companies and accounts controlled by management. The band members, many still in their teens, had little understanding of these arrangements and no access to detailed financial statements. Requests for information were routinely dismissed. Over the years, suspicions grew as the Rollers watched their hits climb the charts and their faces appear on lunchboxes and t-shirts, yet found themselves living on meager allowances. Forensic accountants called in decades later estimated that more than £100 million in royalties had vanished, money that should have changed their lives forever. The legal battle for those missing earnings dragged on for decades. In 2007, the classic lineup sued Arista Records, arguing that unpaid royalties stretched back to the 1970s. The case exposed a tangle of contracts, missing paperwork, and accounting practices that made it nearly impossible to follow the money. Arista eventually settled in 2016, paying out $3.5 million, less than £70,000 per surviving member after legal fees. Compared to the band's global sales and cultural reach, the payout was little more than a footnote. The true scale of what was lost remains hidden behind non-disclosure agreements and sealed court records, but the effect was undeniable. The Bay City Rollers became a cautionary tale about what happens when fame is filtered through secrecy and control. The money, like so much else in their story, slipped through their fingers, leaving only questions and regret. Survivors of Tam Paton's orbit have spent decades carrying stories rarely spoken aloud. In 2023, those stories finally broke through the silence. The documentary, Secrets of the Bay City Rollers, gathered testimony that forced the music world to confront what had been hidden in plain sight. One survivor described being just 13 when he was taken to Paton's house, where the atmosphere shifted from pop celebration to something far more sinister. Famous faces, TV personalities, producers, even household names moved through the rooms, drugs were handed out, young boys from local care homes arrived, some brought by others under threat of blackmail. The survivor recalled being photographed in compromising situations and told that if he didn't do as Paton demanded, those photos would be sent to his family. He wasn't alone. Others testified to being pressured into recruiting more boys, estimating that as many as 20 were drawn in this way. The parties themselves became notorious in whispered circles. Gert Magnus, once considered for the band, remembered gatherings where sex was expected in exchange for career advancement. He named Jimmy Savile as a regular guest. Nobby Clark, the Rollers' original singer, recounted Paton's suggestion that sleeping with BBC DJ Chris Denning would lead to better promotion. Both Savile and Denning would later be revealed as serial abusers, but in the 1970s, their presence at Paton's gatherings only reinforced the sense of untouchable power. The network extended beyond celebrities. Alan Longmuir's autobiography details Paton's boasts about his friends in the police and judiciary. Paton claimed the police themselves brought boys from care homes to his door, all under the pretense of keeping them out of trouble. When survivors tried to report what had happened, they were ignored. Authorities, it seemed, were either unwilling or unable to intervene. The result was a closed circle of exploitation, protected by influence and silence. For the boys trapped inside, the cost was lifelong. Some never spoke of what happened until the documentary aired. Others, like Pat McGlynn and Nobby Clark, spent years wrestling with shame and anger. The Rollers' story, once defined by screaming fans and chart-topping hits, now carried the weight of crimes that reached far beyond the music. The revelations of 2023 shattered the last illusions of innocence, revealing a world where fame had been built on secrets and where the victims were left to pick up the pieces long after the spotlight faded. By 1978, the Bay City Rollers were unraveling. Years of relentless touring, broken promises, and the weight of secrets had left the band exhausted and divided. Arguments over money and direction grew louder. The classic lineup splintered, with Les McCune leaving after a final, bitter studio session. The dream that once filled stadiums now ended in silence, each member drifting into their own struggles. For Les McCune, the collapse was more than professional, it was personal. Fame had come with a cost he never fully understood until it was gone. The pressures of stardom, the isolation enforced by their manager, and the easy access to drugs all took their toll. After the band split, Les found himself adrift, carrying the scars of his teenage years into adulthood. Addiction became a constant battle. He spoke candidly in later years about being handed amphetamines before shows and how those habits followed him long after the music faded. The years that followed were marked by attempts to recapture the past, solo albums, reunion tours, public appearances, but the shadow of what happened behind the scenes never lifted. Les was arrested for driving under the influence in 2011, a public sign of private struggles that had lasted for decades. He described feeling trapped by memories and regrets, haunted by the knowledge that the world saw only the smiling boy in Tartan, not the man wrestling with pain. Les' story was not unique among the Rollers. Each member faced their own demons, substance abuse, depression, and the lingering impact of exploitation. The band's breakup did not bring freedom or closure. Instead, it scattered them into a world that remembered their faces but had little space for their reality. The cost of Rollermania was measured not just in lost fortunes, but in years of turmoil that shaped the rest of their lives. Les McCune's journey from teen idol to survivor exposed the deep human damage left behind when the music stopped. Alan Longmuir, the band's original bass player and a gentle presence amid the chaos, died in July 2018 at the age of 70. His final years were shaped by the same turbulence that defined his youth, battling illness, reflecting on lost friendships, and watching the band's legacy twist through courts and headlines. Tributes poured in from fans and fellow musicians, many recalling him as the heart of the group, the one who never lost his sense of kindness even as the world around him spun out of control. Les McKeown followed in April 2021, found dead at home at just 65. Years of addiction, regret, and the weight of a life lived in the glare of fame left scars that never fully healed. His widow described him as a man haunted by memories, yet still searching for peace. The news of his passing sent a ripple through generations of fans, many of whom still remembered the boyish face behind the tartan scarf. For those who knew the real story, his death felt like the closing of a painful chapter that had been left open for too long. The tragedies did not end there. Derek Longmuir, the band's drummer and Alan's younger brother, was convicted in 2000 for possession of child abuse images. The conviction stunned those who had grown up idolizing the Rollers and cast a long shadow over the band's memory. Derek, who had become a nurse after leaving music, was struck from the professional register, his reputation in ruins. The public reckoning was swift and unforgiving, adding another layer of sorrow to a story already marked by loss. The deaths of Alan and Les and the disgrace of Derek left the Bay City Rollers' legacy tangled in grief and controversy. What began as a promise of escape and joy for millions ended in silence, scandal, and unanswered questions. A stark reminder of the cost that often comes with fame. For today's artists, the Bay City Rollers story is more than a cautionary tale, it's a call to action. The contracts that once trapped young bands in silence and poverty are now under greater scrutiny than ever before. Where the Rollers signed away their rights as teenagers, often without independent advice or a clear understanding of the terms, new generations have the benefit of transparency, legal oversight, and the lessons learned from past disasters. Modern boy bands like One Direction and BTS operate in a world shaped by these hard-won changes. Their agreements are often subject to regular audits, and many artists now demand access to detailed royalty statements and the right to challenge unfair deductions. Industry norms have shifted. Artists expect and increasingly receive clearer terms and a voice in negotiations. Advocacy groups and unions work to ensure that contracts are reviewed by independent experts, and young performers are educated about their rights before signing anything. The Rollers' legal battles, stretching over decades and ending with a fraction of what they were owed, have become textbook examples in music law classes and seminars on artist protection. Their experience has fueled calls for mandatory contract transparency and the right to regular financial audits. For every young performer stepping onto a stage today, the Bay City Rollers legacy is a silent warning. Ask questions, demand clarity, and never assume that fame guarantees security. The heartbreak of Rollermania's aftermath has given rise to an industry that, while still imperfect, is far better equipped to protect its stars from the shadows that once consumed Britain's biggest boy band. At their peak, the Bay City Rollers sold millions of records and sparked a craze that spanned continents. Yet, verified contracts show they received only a fraction of expected royalties, with a 1971 Bell Records deal granting them minimal percentages and documented settlements in 2016 amounting to just £70,000 each. Tam Paton's control, exposed through financial audits and survivor testimony, left lasting scars, both economic and personal. Recent documentaries have revealed layers of abuse, but the full extent of Paton's network and the destination of much of the band's earnings remain undisclosed, with several financial documents still sealed. Today, major boy bands like One Direction and BTS operate under stricter contract transparency and auditing, a direct result of cases like the Rollers. Their story stands as evidence. Global fame offers no guarantee of protection, and the fight for artists' rights is far from over. As long as key files remain classified, The final chapter of Rollermania is still unwritten.